Hello and welcome. Today I'm bringing you my review and ranking of Tomb Raider 3, as found on the Tomb Raider Collection 1 for the Evercade. Originally released for the PlayStation 1 in 1998, Tomb Raider 3 was the third Tomb Raider game in 3 years, which I think is particularly impressive given the size and scope of the Tomb Raider games. Unlike the previous Tomb Raider games, I didn't play and complete Tomb Raider 3 back in the day. Although I did play a demo, I didn't even bother to finish the demo. I think by that point in time I'd had my fill of the Tomb Raider games and my taste had moved on to other things, probably Final Fantasy VII or something. The story involves Lara chasing after 4 artifacts which came from a crashed meteorite which got spread around the globe, and from there it basically descends into your usual Tomb Raider style shenanigans, with a corporation called RX Tech trying to profiteer off of the crashed meteorite and raiding of tombs and, you know the drill. In essence, Tomb Raider 3 is very much Tomb Raider doing what Tomb Raider does, but it does build upon the formula, adding some extra moves and vehicles and weapons. It also introduces non-linear progression, allowing you to choose which part of the world to go to next after finishing the first set of levels. But I'll come back to that later. First of all, let's just go through the basics, such as the
graphics.
Tomb Raider 3 pushes the PlayStation 1 harder than the previous games had. It managed to achieve a slightly more rounded and more naturalistic look compared to the more blocky earlier games, adds weather effects and more lighting. And I'll be perfectly honest, it's a bit of a mixed bag. I actually found the opening level, especially the earlier scenes of it, looked quite ugly in comparison to the previous Tomb Raider games. Even though it was better technically, it lacked the same visual appeal, but things do quickly improve. I'd say overall the graphics are better than in the previous Tomb Raider games, although occasionally it does cause a bit more in the way of performance issues, with some of the weather effects affecting the frame rate. Also, many of the levels are larger than the previous games and more outdoors, and there are times when you can really see the cracks forming, where they push the PS1 a bit too hard. But there are also points when it really hits the mark, particularly in one of the later levels, where it makes very effective use of the lighting, which really conjures up a scary horror feel. But all in all, I think it is sort of one step forward, one step back, with some levels looking absolutely stunning and much better than anything in the previous Tomb Raider games, but a few just looking somewhat inferior, or lacking the charm and same level of design as the levels of the previous games, leaving it pretty much on par as a whole, just maybe less consistent.
Sound and music.
Generally, it's pretty much on par with the previous games. The same quality of voice acting, which is mixed. The gun sound effects do sound a bit more punchy, although some of the background ambient noises were a bit mixed, sounding a bit glitchy. I'm not sure if this is an Evercade thing or if it is accurate to original hardware. The music here is very good. Again, it's used in similar ways to the previous 2 games, which is to say the music is very good. A little bit sparse and used sparingly. Well, I just said that really, didn't I?
Gameplay.
On the surface, the gameplay is Tomb Raider as usual. You still have the very grid-based movement and mechanics, requiring the same kind of methodical precision as the previous games. Lara now has a sprint, which is used throughout the game in some of the puzzles, usually timed door type puzzles or escaping traps, and it's used well. My only gripe with it is you have to press sprint once you're already running, otherwise Lara will stand still and not go anywhere. Lara can also crawl, something she couldn't do before. Again, this is a little bit clunky, but given the pace of crawling, I suppose it's realistic and it doesn't really hinder the gameplay. It's used quite well in a number of puzzles. And finally, for new moves, you have the monkey bars. So Lara can jump up and grab things above her and swing arm to arm, monkey bar style. Again, this is used quite a lot and takes a bit of getting used to. Having played the previous 2, I found myself missing where there would be places I could climb. But again, that's a me issue, something you learn to get used to as you play through the game. The downside with it is when you are climbing with monkey bars, The look function by pressing down the L1 button is pretty much useless, so you sometimes have to drop off from climbing monkey bar style blindly and hope you land somewhere safe. I also found the controls as a whole a little bit more finicky than in the previous games. I'm assuming this is due to the additional abilities and the introduction of the ability to use analog sticks in it, which I didn't use. I played it all on D-pad because analog sticks with the grid-based movement seem a little bit pointless. But I did find myself in positions where Lara just wouldn't move, like she was stuck against the scenery and things like that. Nothing too major, and given the pace of the game it wasn't overly detrimental. But I couldn't help but notice it happened more frequently in Tomb Raider 3 than in the previous games. The new vehicles are a bit of a mixed bag. The quad bike controls much like the snowmobile from Tomb Raider 2, and that's largely fine. The kayak controls, I suppose, semi-realistically for, kayaking on whitewater rapids, which means it's a pain in the arse to control. But it's still arguably better to control than the underwater mini-sub thing. Well, it's not a mini-sub, it's a mini jet engine thing propelling Lara underwater faster on one of the London levels, and that is a pain in the backside to control. Also in Antarctica there are minecart sections, and these are quite well done. At least I quite enjoyed them anyway. But despite some of the vehicles not controlling all that well, they're a fairly minor point of the game and they don't really detract from it. In fact, they had a little bit of variety, and I find that I was quite forgiving of them despite some annoyances. The other aspect that's changed is the scale of the levels, or the scope of the levels, and the non-linear aspect. After you finish the first 4 levels set in India, you can choose whether you go to the South Pacific, Nevada or to London. In theory it doesn't matter which you choose, but in practice if you save Nevada till last, you will suffer for it, as on one of the levels you end up with all your weapons being taken away, meaning that if you do Nevada last, you might not have that much in the way of weapons when you go into the Antarctica levels. The levels themselves are often more complex, a bit more vertical and maze-like. The puzzles are some of them can be very unforgiving. There's a fair few instant deaths and gotcha moments. Fortunately, there is much less in the way of combat than in Tomb Raider 2, and far less enemies with guns. Oh, that reminds me of something else the game added. Poison. Some enemies will poison you, requiring you to use a med pack to remove the poison effects. Anyway, the overall quality of the level design is very mixed, and I think Tomb Raider 3 has some of the best and some of the worst levels from the first 3 Tomb Raider games. Many of the levels are, like I said, very labyrinthine. They're large, expansive, and require a lot of going back and forth and backtracking, which can be a little bit tiresome, especially if you missed something. On some levels it works very well, it gives you a very open feel. On others it just feels tiresome. The opening levels set the game stall out quite clearly. The first level is very wide open. There's quite a few areas which feel a little bit redundant, so there's plenty of scope for exploration, and it's a big level. The second level is similarly large and also quite challenging. The game doesn't pull any punches initially. On my playthrough I did Nevada first, knowing about the weapon loss thing, and I generally enjoyed the Nevada levels, but there were a couple of them which, although very interesting, were also quite long and challenging and really felt like a lot of work to get through. But they also had some fantastic moments in them, progressing to the South Pacific, and it felt a bit more classic Tomb Raider style. And then I went to London, and that's almost where I stopped playing the game. While some of the previous levels had been large, maybe a bit awkward to navigate, and had a lot of backtracking, 2 of the London levels in particular took this to whole new levels with some really obscure and hard to work out puzzles. But thanks to being able to find guides for the game online very easily, I was able to solve them. But I think if I'd been playing this back in the day, that might well have been my stopping point, in particular the Aldwych level. Some of the puzzles in that, combined with the awkward traversal of the level, it was a lot, and I was glad it was over. Fortunately, the last few levels, or the last area of Antarctica, was a lot better. Although very challenging, particularly with the cold water effect of swimming in Antarctica being quite punishing, the levels felt much more manageable and sort of less obtuse in the puzzles, and generally better in the navigation. And I should get on to what it's notorious for, and that's its difficulty. Between the gotcha traps, the size, some moments where you have to take damage and managing your medkits, it is a very challenging game. And when you combine that with the bloated level design, it generally feels like it's a bit too much. They're a bit too ambitious and it doesn't quite hit the mark.
Overall opinion.
Tomb Raider 3 is a sequel that's clearly trying to raise the bar and build upon what's come before rather than staying static and just churning out a quick and easy sequel. And while I'd say that overall it stumbles a little bit more than it succeeds, it's still a very solid game and definitely one for fans of the previous two. It is an epic adventure, maybe a bit too epic for its own good. It's still compelling enough to see it through, even if by the end I did very much feel that it outstayed its welcome. To be perfectly honest, they could have cut all of the London levels and I still think it would have had a decent sized game and challenge, and ended up with an overall tighter experience.
Ranking.
Placing it on my overall ranking list where I rank every Evercade game ever, I've decided to put it above the New Zealand story but below Jetpack, placing it at 74 out of 394 games that I've ranked so far. Now that's ranking by someone who is a fan of the series, and I know they're not for everyone, so if you don't get on with the tank controls or the methodical gameplay, then yeah, you'd probably rank it lower. Anyway, I think that's everything for this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.